Welcome to Music Ed Tech Talk, a podcast about music, education, and technology. I'm your host, Robbie Burns. Today's guest is Gillian Desmarais. Gillian was recently named the 2024 National Time Technology Teacher of the Year and a 2024 Yamaha 40 Under 40 Music Educator. She currently teaches K-12 music production and engineering at Maplewood Public Schools in Maplewood, Minnesota. Gillian has been nationally recognized for her work in electronic composition and is an active clinician and adjudicator for state and international music conferences and competitions. She has collaborated with companies such as Ableton Live, Yamaha, Apogee, Novation, and Jamstick to design new music technologies and curriculum for the classroom. As a music technology graduate student at New York University, she continues to perform IRB research in collaboration with Dr. Alex Ruthman, director of the NYU MusEd Lab, for developing curriculum, new music ensembles, and web applications. We might as well get the show started. Welcome. I've been wanting to have you on for quite a long time. We met, did we meet in person at TMEA last February, like 2023?
That sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah. You're doing all sorts of fantastic things in the space of music education technology. There's a lot about like the ins and outs of your day-to-day that like I don't know, and I thought it would be really fun to have you come on and like talk in fuller detail about specifically like what kinds of things you're teaching, what kinds of, more broadly, like what motivates you to be using so much technology with your kids in the classroom, and then just sort of maybe talk about, like I always like to do, just talk about some of the tools that you like and some of the stuff you're passionate about. Yeah,
absolutely. I'm so ready to go. And thank you so much for having me on your podcast. This is so exciting. It is currently 8 a.m. here, well, 8:16 to be accurate, in Minnesota. And where are you right now?
I am in Maryland, so it is 9:16.
Okay, yeah. On a Sunday, by the way. We are dedicated teachers getting up nice and early to deliver this podcast to you. Really excited about it, though.
Okay, so maybe the outline here I have is like, do you want to like briefly introduce yourself and a little bit of like your background? Like, how did you become you? Wait, that makes it sound a little heavier.
That is very heavy. I don't know if I'm ready for that.
You can take that in whichever direction you think is helpful.
Well, I am a music teacher, reside in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I've been teaching for about 8 years now, and I've taught in a charter school, public school, and now I currently teach in a behavioral trauma school. It has been just an incredible experience, just the whole 8 years running. Of course, there have been a lot of failures, like we started this conversation with, and there have been a lot of successes. And I feel like the best successes that I've ever had in the classroom have come from taking those risks, doing things that I've never done before, things that I propose that students will really like. And sometimes it works out great. But honestly, those successful moments when it really does click in, it makes every single day worth it. You know, it makes you want to come back. And I'm actually the fourth generation of musicians in my family. My great-grandfather was a drummer. My grandfather was Lenny DiMuzio, who worked for Zildjian for many, many years as an A&R rep. And my mother sort of walked in his footsteps. She's a professional drummer. She works outside of Boston, Massachusetts. And I just grew up in a very musical household, just always loved experiencing music in school. So I was part of, as many ensembles as I could be. And, always music in the house. My mom, in addition to being a drummer, she's also a DJ, which is just so unique. I didn't even realize it growing up how unique that was, because there are not a lot of female DJs around. And so, she exposed me to a bunch of different types of music. And, that kind of carried me through high school and then college. I really discovered that I had a passion for music technology, and it really wasn't being served at the time in the college I was in, just because they didn't have the resources to provide that sort of class. And so I was studying music education and going to school for that. And I decided to withdraw, actually. I took a year off and I studied with a composer. And I also did a lot of self-study. I learned the DAW, and my first DAW was Logic Pro.
Awesome choice.
Yes. It's kind of like Photoshop in a way, but for musicians, in the sense that where there's just so many features and you can dive in. And at the time, I think it was like Logic 7 or 8. So they just had all the features on display. It's not like now where it sort of looks like GarageBand, which I really wish I had because I would have learned a lot easier. And I was telling one of my students the other day about this too, is, in the old Logic, it used to crash and then it wouldn't autosave. So
Right.
the first 30 songs that I ever wrote, I really dedicated time to. I absolutely loved them and I lost them. It just was the fact of the matter. You're trying something new for the first time and sometimes you don't get those experiences back. It's just like you're in the moment with it. But for me, it didn't save. But those memories were saved up here.
Yeah.
And that's what mattered. So later on, I ended up going back to school, went back to college, and I brought all that music tech to school. So I ended up starting the school's first electronic music group. My professor noticed that, or, probably heard through the grapevine that I was really into this. And he wanted to do a Stephen Bryant piece, Ecstatic Waters, which uses electronics and uses Ableton. And he was like, we need you. And for the first time, I felt accepted. I felt excited that music technology was something that I could be seen, as, someone who really knows that and is passionate about that. So continued furthering myself. I wrote an EP of music and I released it on Spotify. And this was back in 2016. So it was a little less popular. And so, that kind of continued. I started my first year teaching year later. And yeah, I ended up bringing all of that knowledge, all that experience. And I feel like the period of time where I was accepted as someone who did this, that really helped me when I started my first year, because I just took that same mindset and was like, you know what? They may not like it. They may, but I'm just going to be me. And so with that, 8 years later, I didn't mention this, but my first year teaching, I was on a cart and I was just teaching general music. So, very specifically the songs, the games, it was K through 5. And 8 years later, I now have a full-fledged music production engineering class that I teach K through 12. So all of my students are involved in, learning the launch pad and learning piano. We have other instruments too that we use, but primarily they're learning how to express themselves in the DAW.
But you're like the 80 millionth person to say that these technological skills and interests are, a lot of them developed independently. You had to sort of just go on your own little journey, because that's where I'm at too. I mean, I was in graduate, I've always been interested in computers, but I was probably getting really deep into it maybe by the time I was a graduate student, and was exploring I bought my first MacBook and was just really exploring the software that could make me more productive. And then I started arranging and writing more music in Sibelius. So I was getting my notation skills down. I was getting my Logic skills down, and just started watching tons and tons and tons of these online tutorials for software, for productivity, and also creative art making, ranging, and not just music too, Photoshop and other kinds of tools. And it's not unlike either too. It's sometimes I find this with the rhythm instruments, guitar, bass, piano, they're not really, a lot of my colleagues don't get the kind of experience that I had. It took me several years into my music teaching career to realize how much I had kind of done outside of the pathway that my music education degree had laid out for me. There was just so much of that happening exterior to that traditional experience.
Yeah. We have that conversation all the time when we're at conferences, other music technology teachers or music teachers in specialties. It's I ended up delving into a bunch of different specialty areas before I kind of found my niche. And I think that's really cool. I was taking photography when I was in high school, and the whole idea of using Photoshop, it is kind of daunting, but when you go from experiencing that and then stepping into the world of the DAW, it's kind of similar in a way. You're, instead of manipulating an image, you're manipulating audio or manipulating MIDI. So yeah, all that information kind of carries over depending on what it is you delve into. But yeah, it's a common conversation that we do have, because I think it's really cool how people end up in the passions that they do. I think it's really cool when you have teachers with that knowledge going to colleges and bringing that to the undergrads, because they might not even be aware of it. And it may be their inner passion they don't even know, and they don't have that experience because maybe it's just not provided. So, I mean, even just like a really good example of that is hip hop education, which has become so pronounced, especially within the past 10 years. You know, the whole study of DJing, which, I mean, I grew up with it a little bit for sure from my mom, just kind of seeing her what she does. But in terms of really knowing how a turntable works and knowing how the software works, I mean, that's a whole other area. And it wasn't until I met DJ Happa and he started showing me how to use some of that, which some of you may know him, shout out. Really great educator, and just released a book all on how to DJ for kids. Yeah, it really opened my eyes. It's just like, wow, this is a whole different avenue of expressing yourself musically through the process of remixing and the process of, creating covers and things like that. So I love that. There's so many different avenues in music, and, of course it might feel like a lot of weight on your shoulders, because you want to give your kids as much as you can, but it's not something that you need to carry on your own, because there's so many resources out there. There's so many incredible teachers and just materials and, lessons that, you can just grab online and use those free resources to make that possible for your students. And that was a lot of the years of my teaching was kind of borrowing and asking people, their advice and seeing what I could bring to my students. And if they liked it, they liked it. If they didn't, well, it was an opportunity, and we were just trying something. So
are you year 1 of 8 teaching with rolling the cart around, teaching songs and games? Are you at this point in your career thinking like, I gotta get computers, or is there like a progression is there a process through which like your students and your job experience is giving you feedback that then you're sort of more gradually steering in that direction?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So we started off, of course, like using the general instruments, and we had laptops available to us. They were Chromebooks.
Okay.
Only the head teachers had those carts that we could use. And there were only a couple in the school. So there was not a lot of accessibility in terms of being able to use those. So it was, maybe like once every, I think the first year was like once a month, maybe I could reserve those carts, because they were using them for testing and they were using them for all kinds of additional, they used a program back in of course, I'm not going to remember the name of it, but everyone knows about it. It's the huge math program that students start off using. They can kind of rehearse questions, and there's small tests and things like that. But yeah, they were using a lot of those platforms when I first started teaching there. So, those took priority, having the time to do that. And yeah, that draw of like, I need to get technology in my students' hands more often. That was something that was a mission of mine for a while. We ended up moving to a new school my second year of teaching, and the head teacher who had a cart that I could use was across the way. So then that became a little more frequent. Then I could get the computers in my students' hands probably like once a week. But of course it wasn't enough. I wanted to have that opportunity to really allow them to use a program like Soundtrap over and over again, because it helps them to reaffirm the skills they learn. And when they're only doing it once a week, I mean, it goes for anything. It's not enough time. So eventually, by my third year, I was able to bring those computers in my classroom at least 2 to 3 times a week. And, that just came from fighting for it. It's just like, we need this type of tool in this classroom. And this is also what I teach. I had to kind of bring that to admin, and I had to show other teachers as well, like, this is the kind of work that I want my students to be doing. So yeah, we got there, but it took a long time. And then when I moved schools, that also gave me a lot of leeway too. So when I transitioned to Hanover, I told them specifically, I teach music technology. This is what I do. And this is the curriculum that I've developed. And I really want to be able to provide this for your students. And they were the ones to say, okay, well, it sounds like you're going to need computers most of the time, and you're going to need some sort of additional instruments with that. Here's what we have. And so then I took that. We had computers in our classroom every day. They just sat there. They didn't need to be removed. They were Macs. They were like the nicest computers. And we used those for a couple of years. It was great. Right now, in the current school that I'm in, we use PCs. So I mean, they're in my classroom full time, which is great, but they're also PCs. So they get bugs and they shut down when you don't want them to shut down and stuff, but we roll with it and it's fine. But if you can advocate for technology every single year, you get one step closer to having that in your classroom full time. And it just took to make that happen, but it happened.
And that's is that your current teaching position or the second to most current?
It's the current teaching position I'm in. We have computers in the actual music room, so kids can hop on whenever.
These are the Windows PCs. Cool. And are you in the same room all day long?
Yes.
And what is your course load like? Like what is a day of classes looking like for you? Are you teaching similar content area, like all grade levels? Or do you have different subjects you teach?
Yeah, so I teach 6 classes a day, and each class is about 30 to 45 minutes long, and a normal day begins with elementary and finishes with the secondary high school level. So it's actually really nice to keep pace with the curriculum. Every day we have meetings after school with grade level groups, and that's really important for me because it keeps me in check since it is K through 12. It's a huge span. And in the process of building that sort of curriculum, there was a lot of conversations about the particular types of students that we have because I believe 99% of our students are on IEPs in the current school that I'm in. I'm in a behavioral trauma school. So I think it's about, I want to say over 75% of our students come from foster homes or group homes. So I have a very particular type of community that I work with. And with these students, the majority of the time, I really try to find tools that just help them to become better musicians. And that's where the technology comes in. A lot of these students, they struggle with the facility of an instrument. So originally when I had brought them pianos and we started working with those, for whatever reason, it became really challenging for them to make sense of the keyboard. I introduced launch pads and all of a sudden it was like, oh my gosh, they get it. And I'm not sure how that happened or why, but I think maybe it's just in the creation of it. And when you're sitting down, for example, we do a lot of like beat making. So when we use the launch pad, everything is oriented pretty easily, kind of like a computer keyboard. You can find things very simply. And then just being able to keep the rhythm is probably the hardest piece of it. Learning a piano, if we're talking about melody and chords, it is a little easier. There's, some difficulties there with the launch pad sometimes when you're trying to introduce students to scales or you're trying to introduce them to other concepts related to harmony. It's a lot easier to visualize on the piano. But we continue to go back to the launch pad because once we can kind of affirm things with the piano, we can then use those tools on the launch pad. Like there's actually chord making tools. So you press a pad and it creates a chord for you.
Right.
And for students, as long as they have that oral skill, they can use that in their music and know how to use it. And that's really the only thing that I want them to walk away with. It's just like, okay, well, there's going to be a lot that I don't know about chords, for example. And, maybe that's something that they'll pursue when they go to college, but maybe not. The majority of our students don't often go to college. They go into other situations. So for them, I just want them to know how to be creative and have the tools to, find that voice and be able to express themselves. And all of the language behind it is kind of revealed after they explore with the tool. So, a lot of using the launch pad gets into that. So in terms of what I teach, for K through 5, we still do a bunch of the songs in the games, and it's a lot of learning music literacy because that's really important. And it's also part of...
Do you have, since we're talking about tools, do you have any tools that they use? Like I know there's curricular music platforms. There's like Music First, there's Quaver. Like, do you have any of that kind of stuff going on?
I have been exposed to Music First and Quaver, and I think they're great. Awesome platforms. But for me, I feel like these kids, because they struggle so much with and actually a lot of these students come from situations where they're not getting interaction at all at home. So when they come into my classroom, They need that. They
Yeah.
crave that. And then also in their other classes too, the head teacher is pretty strict about making sure that they get their independent work done. So there's a lot of independent time, and then they go home and they have more independent time. So for me, I want to bring that collaboration. I want to bring that community, and that's what happens in that room. So that becomes a huge priority for K through 5. It's like, how can I really build this community together through music? And then when they get to middle school, they've had those experiences, and now they kind of want to branch off and be more independent. Like, they want to find their voice. They've had that time to grow and learn together. But also too, the community is still important in middle school. No, with like band and choir, it's really important that students are experienced together.
Are those offered at your school too?
My particular school, no, we don't.
So are you the only person? Are you the entire music department?
I am the entire music department. Yeah. We are trying to see if we can get an ensemble started, but it would require another teacher. And our district right now is not in a place to hire another teacher yet. I'm still pushing at it. It's one of those expanding things. But when I moved to this current school that I'm in now, I was their first music teacher. They'd never had music before me. It's more common now. Music is offered and then it's taken away and then it's provided again. So that was the kind of situation that, I was exposed to, and I decided to provide this. But ensembles are so important, and someday it would be really nice to have that for these particular students. It would just need to be the right type of ensemble. So in talking about the curriculum, middle school, again, we focus a lot on building those DAW skills. And then high school, they have a pretty good idea of how to use the DAW at this point. So now I try to transition them to a professional DAW. Middle school is using Soundtrap. High school then delves into Ableton. And from there, we're trying to make the connections to what Soundtrap offered and now what Ableton has. So, for example, effects, towards the end of their middle school experience, what reverb is, they know what delay is, they know what EQ or compression is. And now when they go into that professional DAW, it's all of the fine-tuning tools that are in there they're starting to explore next. Because you go into a professional DAW and there's just so much to do. And there's so many different ways to edit sound. And it can be overwhelming, but if we can start from like the baseline elements, kids can navigate a little easier and it's less daunting. So
Ableton took me getting a push on my desk to realize that the whole thing is designed with the idea that you have a grid of colorful squares
right.
in front of you.
It's pretty amazing. And they keep upgrading and they keep adding new tools. I mean, Ableton, Pro Tools, Reason, Cubase, there's so many different DAWs out there. And if you're a teacher who really wants to get into experiencing a professional DAW, you can very easily just sign up for a trial for all of them because they all offer free trials and just see which one vibes with you the most. I know there's a lot of people who use GarageBand because it comes with the Mac. And Logic now looks a lot like GarageBand. So that might be the first step, is maybe experiencing that and seeing if that's a good fit for you. I mean, it was a really good fit for me when I started. And then eventually I wanted something that was a little more versatile. And that's where Ableton came in. Ableton's great for that because there's MIDI mapping features, there's sampling features. You have the arrangement view and the session view where you can cue clips, things that most DAWs don't really offer. Some are starting to offer it. I think Pro Tools is now for sure. But just having that secondary view is really cool too. And it really maps up well with most of the MIDI instruments that they offer. So it's worth doing the research. But free trials all the way. That's So
that's cool though, because because you're doing the whole spectrum of age, you get to kind of feed yourself. So like I would imagine you can really do some interesting stuff with a high school student, knowing that you were able to successfully give them all of those prerequisite skills that you might in a different teaching situation might not have been able to like guarantee.
There's a lot of independence that grows from that. I actually have one high school student who I'm particularly thinking as he is an incredible rapper. And I basically taught him everything that I know about the DAW. And then I thought he was going to be coming and continuing this work and just growing and growing and trying to show that off to the rest of the class. And instead, he started skipping class and he started to produce this EP completely on his own. And he was starting to reach out for other music sources, people in the community who also rapped and who also produced and things like that. So, I thought I was going to hold on to him a little longer, but then that independence kind of took over. And now he wants to have a whole life outside of school that's music related, which is great, which is the goal. But don't stop coming to class. Of course, I had to be on him about it, and he finally came back. But
he was just doing an internship.
Exactly. We just think of it that way. It's great to see that. And sometimes that does happen where you have students who, they've learned everything that you can teach them, and they now are going to seek out more resources out there, and they may seek out another teacher. And I'm not going to lie, I was not feeling great about it. I was like, have I plateaued? Am I not as good as I thought I was? At a certain point, how much more can we teach? So, yeah. Anyway, I digress. It's good stuff, regardless. But yeah, high schoolers, I feel like, they get to a certain point where they know what they need to know from me. And it really comes to a point where they need to start delving into other areas to start building their portfolio. So when I say other areas, I mean like audio video. That's something that we really love to get into. So the older grades, they start to learn how to make a music video, because that's a cool concept. And they also learn how to make really good album art. And there's so many resources out there too for that now. I hate to say it, but AI is great for album art.
AI is actually great for a lot of the exterior things that make a music, especially like a digital music class, interesting and engaging, but are maybe not like the core competencies you're looking to. Like we do a variation of, so shout out to Ethan Hine and Will Kuhn and their awesome book, Electronic Music School.
Ooh.
In our curriculum, we have a project that's really similar to their product advertisement project, where the students invent a humorous fake product and then make an advertisement where they record their voice doing the pitch, and then they add background music and sound effects and all these things. And we sometimes they really struggle with the script writing part of that, and there are times where I either use AI to challenge them to do better, or we just have it assist us in the ways that it is good. So for example, if somebody, I've said this exact same story on the show before, so sorry for people who've already heard it, but one of our students invented a product that was called the Sponge Cousin.
Okay.
And think of it as in the Scrub Daddy universe, this product. It is a sponge to clean your sponge. And I thought, that's hilarious. But his script was so uninspired and bland. And I'm like, you have the coolest, most hilarious idea. And I typed it into ChatGPT. I was like, write a parody advertisement for, and I just described this project as he did to me, his own words. And then it did exactly the right kind of thing, because parody is a pretty high percent derivative.
Right.
It's
right.
It's the whatever percent isn't derivative is that percent that takes it just a slight bit over the top of what is real.
Yes.
So he's this thing is gonna take our jobs, and I'm like, well, I mean, it can assist you, and maybe there's some areas where it will tell you maybe that you could do better next time. But
I know it really shows you how easy it is to just come up with an absolutely wonderful explanation about something. Whether you're trying to write an email or whether you're trying to write a statement to post online. I feel like a lot of those social media things can be made a lot easier, because I will sit with my phone for a half hour and I will write, no joke, 3 sentences to just post something about, I have a picture and I'm trying to explain what I see and, make it interesting and fun. And I'll put it in GPT and it's just in 2 seconds, I'll have the perfect post. And I think to myself, why did I waste all that time trying to curate something when I could have just relied on this? Now, obviously, it uses a lot of language that maybe is not appropriate for a post. it means everyone has their own way of expressing themselves online. So for me, some of the language is just like, I'm not going to use that. That's
not you.
That's not me.
But there is something to be said for like getting the general like formal structure of a thing together for you, and then you can go in and like edit 90% of it. And I think to your point, and this is what I meant when I had this kid see me use ChatGPT, is like the point of the assignment is to learn how to record the human voice and like appropriately mix and EQ it so that it stands out from the background track of music. So like the point is not to write a humorous script, although it is an enjoyable and instructive part of doing that project where we can learn some things about comedy and tone and delivery, which are also important to music as an art form. But like the point of the project, like there's nowhere on the rubric where I grade them for being like writing a specific way or including specific language. So that can sort of help us in the same way that like making album artwork for your music project can as well.
Oh yeah. And also too, it does allow you to work on higher order thinking skills with your kids in certain projects. So for example, like writing raps is hard for my students. And I'll ask them to just, improvise. Whatever comes out. I'll put a beat on. And for 3 minutes straight, they could improvise. But I ask them to pick up a pencil and write it down, and they cannot do it. And it's the weirdest thing. But maybe it's like a jazz musician. Like you ask them to write down what they think they can play. And it's just like, no, let me just play it. So I don't know if there's something there, but I have found that sometimes those other resources like Songwriter's Pad, we can get into that. We can get into more AI tools, but to kind of have a theme and then have a general mood that you want to have that theme around, it'll spit out a verse, a chorus, pretty much whatever you want. And it'll be pretty good. Students can edit that as much as they want, and then they can use that as a template to then rap into their song. And it works. And now we can start to get into rhythm. We can start to get into tone. We can start to get into mic technique. Like all of those things can be present now because we're not spending 3 weeks trying to painstakingly write an improvised rap. So
right, exactly. Yeah, that's how I feel exactly. Well, we can get into AI more, but let me ask you first, while we're covering the topics related to like how you're using technology in your classroom, just before we go in that direction, are there any other tools, whether they're hardware or software, that your students use that you are excited about, or that you use, not even necessarily like music? Like I'm a big productivity app nerd. So like, are there any things you're using to better yourself in this field?
Ooh.
Or just things that we didn't mention that students are using too?
Ooh, okay. So if we're getting to favorite tools, I got to go back to the launch pads. And when I say that, they're Novation Launchpad Pros. That's what we use in our classroom. They love the USB microphones that we have. I will not say the same. They look the same as a condenser microphone. You just plug them in USB. They're nice for having students just come in and they can record it right into their computer station. Awesome. But they have a lot of noise bleed and they're just noisy in general. So it's really hard to make it sound like a professional recording. You need to have an interface and a microphone set up. I just find that's a lot easier to use, get a better, more professional quality sound. But that's because I'm an audio snob. And, students, they just like to put their ideas down and they like to have it recorded on the computer. So Launchpads, USB microphones, they adore Soundtrap. The high school students love Ableton. We did make a small studio space in our classroom. And
I was going to ask about that because I'm just using like a couple of closets that extend off of our general music room when we need to like get an isolated vocal recording. And we're recording straight into our Chromebook. So we're not getting too fancy with the microphone setup. We don't even have the space.
Right.
So I'm curious how other people are managing that attribute of it.
Yeah. So we have a small partition that we've used for art shows. And the partition can fold in and fold out. That's what we use currently for our space. And what's nice about it is that it's probably got some sort of composite in the middle, but then it has that really dense fabric on either side. So it actually works as a really good absorber. So we have that. And then, the way that it's set up in my classroom, there's a little bit of like a extended desk in the corner. So we'll put the interface, the boom stand will either go on the partition or it will go on the actual desk, because all it does, it just clamps on the bottom and then it has the extendable arm. So we use that. And then we also have a laptop set up in that space too. So students can, be a little bit more handheld. It's fine to use a PC, but then if you're standing up and recording, sometimes it's hard to see the screen. So a laptop lets you extend that screen a little more.
So if they're recording audio using that setup, they're recording it into a separate computer. Do they like email it or Dropbox it or something to their Windows PC that's at their station?
They actually just log into their school email on the computer.
Okay, so they're so they're going straight into Soundtrap just from that computer.
Straight into Soundtrap, yeah. And if they were working at professional DAW, that would have to happen, like you said before. We would have to find a way to export the audio, to export the project. It would be a little more painstaking. But for high school students, I just have them use Soundtrap because they know how to use it. And then they'll go back to their computers and then they can export into Ableton and move forward with that. So, I mean, not to go on a tangent about some of these programs, but I got to say, Soundtrap is really amazing. And they have, so many different features that they continue to add every single week. It's so impressive. And again, like my high school students, I want them to learn a professional DAW. And they do learn components of Ableton, but they continue to go back to Soundtrap because there's so much there that they can do.
Yeah, I'm developing my ideas in this area because like I'm a big believer in like technology. I try to even like at this point when I'm presenting for and speaking with other educators about how I use technology, I'm trying to even just like that the word technology is too associated with digital stuff and screens these days. I'm like, these are all just tools. A saxophone is a tool.
Yep.
Soundtrap is a tool. And what I'm also realizing is that in my own journey to make everything I do in front of my computer less clicks and taps, I'm also realizing that there is a healthy amount of resistance that a tool gives you. Like,
yes.
You can't just like think your creative ideas into art. You have to like push down fingerings and like use air, or you have to like click the buttons in the user interface of a DAW. And so the more the software gets smarter and it becomes more accessible. Like Soundtrap, like you can get music that sounds good in Soundtrap like significantly quicker these days.
Yes,
this is why I think we're using it with kids that are younger. But something has to resist you if it's a tool. Like for example, like you have to push a button. Like you can't just think a drum patch and it record. You know what I mean? Like
yeah.
That resistance, whether it is like the physical interaction with the thing or just straight up like a feature limitation, is the basis for so much great creative work.
Yes, that you couldn't have said it better. That's exactly what I was trying to say. Yeah, limitation offers a little more sometimes with creativity. And the same thing goes for certain projects. Like people ask me all the time, how do I get my students started in using Soundtrap or using Ableton? And it's just like, give them limitations, but not too many limitations that they can't be creative with it. So I usually say like, give them 3 objectives. So make a song that's, if we're talking about beginning song, make a song that's 30 seconds long, has 4 instruments, and has fades. Something that they can create whatever it is that they want, but they also have to follow or abide by some of those techniques and tools. So they need to learn how to use the timeline. They need to know how to use a simple editing feature like using volume fades. And they also need to know timbres of instruments. And we talk about that too, but what types of instruments go well together. So like drums, bass, piano, and guitar would be a good combination. And you can work alongside your students with that. But limitation can offer them great access.
Totally. I mean, so limitation, you couldn't have made a better thought and a better idea. But that being said, there's also sometimes like features of the software that are liberating and freeing and that do like, what is it? The Steve Jobs idea of like a bicycle for the mind. So like are there any Soundtrap features in specific that are new favorites of yours that like do a cool thing quick or powerfully?
Oh my gosh. I mean, continually they're releasing more and more features that I absolutely love. But I will say, first off, their orchestral sounds are really good. And we know from listening to a lot of notation programs or listening to some other DAWs, even Ableton, does not have as good orchestral sounds as Soundtrap has for whatever reason. Really, really fantastic. So love that feature. Also, too, section markers are fantastic as well. So
is that a newer one? Because I noticed that popping up
yes,
in the available options for me recently.
Exactly. Yeah, it is new. And
it's so important. Teaching form, you mentioned this, you hinted at this earlier. Teaching meter and teaching form and teaching rhythm are like three of the related, but also three of the hardest things to teach young people to understand.
Yes. And also, too, musical form, just the act of teaching musical form, I can't wrap myself around it as a good thing. I just don't like teaching ABACA. So what I usually do is I have students build a project, and then I kind of organically introduce them to form. Like, oh, you've started to create a different section. This is called, but it becomes a little bit more of like an independent activity. So once I've kind of introduced it to the entire room throughout the course of a project, then I'll address it and I'll say, hey, did you notice when I spoke with you that we were breaking up the different sections? Well, this is something that goes back to 1750 when ternary form. And, then we kind of get into all that. But I like to kind of organically introduce it, because when you just kind of give it to them, like this is structure and this is how songs should be written and blah, 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 it limits them. And there's a lot of music out there nowadays. So nowadays we're not necessarily in a form. They're kind of like expanding that realm. Some of my favorite songs ever don't follow a form. So I try not to put that on my students as much. I tell them it exists and I tell them it works, but they're not required unless it's a specific project to keep it in a form, especially rap music, because rap music is like can be all over the place and it's awesome. But as long as you have differentiating sections, that's all that matters to me. So I think it's so important to do that, because even for me, when I was first learning music, a lot of my love for music came from the creative sitting down, just playing, not even thinking about melody or chords or anything, just playing, and just playing by ear too. All the songs that you love, kind of figuring them out, and that passion grew and grew and grew. And I feel like that does happen for a lot of musicians too nowadays. It's just the experience of being able to grow with music and really discover music. And we don't want students to lose that discovery, that excitement that comes from that experience. So I think allowing them to be able to explore and then kind of revealing it to them. Like, oh, what you're doing is actually this. Or, oh, we have a term for that, and that's this. And it's the beautiful way that music teachers teach how to read music too. It's like, oh, what you're actually doing is syncopation. And it's just like, what? But it's cool. And then, that sticks with them because they connected to that experience first, and then they've labeled it.
Awesome. Yeah. Cool. So section markers. Anything else that comes to mind?
Sorry, I keep going on tangents.
I sent you off. Yeah.
Yes, section markers. And let's see. I also am absolutely loving their synth features. I don't know if anyone is a synth snob, but I love the fact that you can actually go in and adjust the presets, which is so cool. So you can take a sound, adjust how much of, if you want a square wave sound or if you want a triangle wave, like those types of details you can get into. Awesome. New features, their audio sampler is actually really good. I haven't explored it too much, but you can take a sound that you record and you can throw it in the sampler, and you could play your MIDI keyboard or your launch pad, and it'll transform that MIDI sample to whatever pitch that you play.
This is like recording the sound of you hitting a glass with with a spoon, and then you're playing that sound on the keyboard.
Yes, exactly.
With pitch, right?
Love that. So cool. Also, I'm a huge fan of their EQ. Now, for me, I come from an experience where, I loved writing music and I wanted to learn more about mixing and mastering at a certain point, because that becomes a limitation in terms of how good your music can sound. You got to be able to know how to balance certain instruments in your project, and then you need to know how to heighten or diminish certain instruments. So the EQ for those of you who don't know, the equalizer is a fantastic way of being able to pronounce or diminish some of those frequencies that you want in a sound. So when they came out with the visual EQ, basically what it is, it's the human hearing spectrum. So you got like 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. And then you can attenuate or diminish any of those. For my students, it was amazing because we could talk about like, what is the human speaking range? And if you want your sound to sound brighter, what is actually happening under the hood? Because you could easily turn a knob and make it brighter, or you could use a filter and make it brighter. But what is even a filter? Like, you can kind of get into the nitty gritty with that, especially with the high school students. And they actually get it. I mean, even my middle school students, which I didn't think they would, they did. And they use it. And it's like the coolest thing ever because it's that tool that just takes their music to the next step, you know, it takes it over the top. So love that. And the chord maker is new. For those of you who know Bob Habersat, shout out to Bob. Robbie, you probably know how this goes. But, you know, you have your chord selections. For example, you could talk about a pop chord format. And I have a keyboard in front of me, thank goodness. So if we did like C, F, G, C chord, right? Simple progression. Or we could do like C, A, F, G. And it'll create those chords for you so you don't have to actually play them yourself. And it'll just put the MIDI right into Soundtrap. So I could say I want that chord progression. It'll generate it for me. And now I have something that I can use to write lyrics on top of. Or I have some.
That's cool because, you know, for us, we do a ukulele unit and we do play. We get it. That's kind of like my primary vehicle for teaching like how harmony and chord progressions work, in addition to just the performance skills associated with strumming something.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, we do write a little bit. Where in Soundtrap we're working within key areas, and that would probably be I typically have them write something because they have a piano unit too where they're like learning the F, the C, and the G chord like in staff notation, like the grand staff.
Right.
But that sounds like a really good way to translate that to Soundtrap without note flight as the middle piece of it,
which is also great. But I think to be able to just have them all do it in one place, and also learning how to use the piano roll as a skill too. You know, being able to manipulate MIDI notes and realize like, oh, okay, you know, this rhythm looks like this. This is what eighth notes look like on a grid. This is what 16th notes look like on a grid. And then to go to that next level and say, this is the keyboard, but in a vertical format. And this is how I know where my notes go if I'm going to make a chord progression. I mean, it is just, it's a totally different animal. And so the earlier we can introduce them to that, the easier they can get used to it so that when they sit down to write a song, it's not painstaking or they're not having to like jump through hoops. It's just, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to punch in my MIDI notes and know what my rhythm is going to be like. And all of a sudden I can just get into timbres. I can get into mixing and that next level can happen for them. So yeah, love the chord maker. And one last thing, adding a comment is great. They added this feature, I think because, you know, teachers, they found that they wanted to be able to tell students where certain sections needed to be edited. So you can actually add a comment onto a loop and say, awesome verse, you should add more bass. And then students can go ahead back in their project and click on those comments and read them and, you know, be able to respond accordingly. Yeah, I just think it's awesome to have that.
That's great. I love those like little utilitarian kinds of tools,
right?
That help you that's just sort of surround the music making and help add concrete communication and understanding around it. Yeah, that's awesome. I didn't know that one was. I purposefully wanted to ask you this because I know you're interacting with some of these features probably more throughout your day than I am, and I know that I'm seeing things pop up like the EQ, the new visual EQ, because I know there's the one with the little like slidey bits.
Yes,
that's been there for a really, really long time, but it's only in a recent. It's actually that very product advertising project that I mentioned earlier, where we were doing it this most recent go round, and I'm like, oh, there's a new, like I forget if it's a 5-band or a 7-band, but it's got like the little, I don't know the technical terms, but the little draggy bits that you know, the little nodes on top of the line where you can drag up and down and sort of see which frequencies of the human voice you are increasing or decreasing the volume of. So very cool. All right. Well, that's awesome. As we were chatting here, I moved the news section to some AI news, and we were kind of talking about that earlier.
Yes.
So, do you care if I go at some news?
No, yeah, have at it.
All right, great. I try to like talk about the news.
Yeah.
You know, people, the fine people are tuning in, and they're like, "Tell me about technology," and I'm like, "All right, well, let's talk about what's going on." So, I will say too, these first couple of things are going to be thorough topics in a future episode of the show, probably the next one. So, there is an upcoming iPad event. It's, I believe, May 7th. Do you have an iPad?
I do.
Great. I don't know if you're in the market for a new iPad, but this is 2023 is the first year ever since the iPad was introduced where there were no new iPads. So there are new iPads. Most of the musicians I know are the kind of people who are like reading sheets off the iPad. And so I will put this out there that there is a pretty big rumor that the iPad Air, which is the cheaper than the Pro model, is rumored to come out in a larger size, like a 12.9-inch size, which I think is going to be pretty popular for like gigging, teaching, band, choir, orchestra people who need some sort of like notation reading device, but don't want to buy a 12.9-inch iPad Pro and spend like, $1,000. So there's like a lot of rumors swirling around, and I think it's worth talking about because I sometimes get questions about what iPads to buy for what, and I think it'll be interesting to see if there is a cheaper large iPad. I also, to be honest, have like a really hard time imagining because like I used to buy an iPad every couple of years, but I've had my iPad since 2018. Ooh. And I was thinking the other day, I was like, I actually don't know if there's anything they could do that would make me buy a new iPad right away. Like the iPad is very, to me, much like the problems that I have with my iPad are not things that Apple seems to want to fix. So as far as like a giant glorified PDF reader, if they make an iPad Air that's big, I think that'll be pretty big music news for a lot of people. More on that to come. Do you need a new iPad these days? What do you use your iPad for? Is it like a consumption device mostly, like videos, music? What do you think?
Yeah, so there was a period of time where I used my iPad for grading. In fact, I would walk around the classroom, and while students were working on their projects, I would go right into the site that we used for grades, and I would just put it right in. And it was
I do that.
Yeah.
It's really helpful. It's just easier to cradle in your arm while you're walking in the classroom.
Right. Yeah, I love it. I think that's great. Honestly, I started to step away from using the iPad. I don't know why. I found that the computer and my phone, in fact, was capable of doing everything that I needed to do. So now I just use my phone for most things. Not necessarily grading, because I'm not going to walk around on my phone because that doesn't look that great. But, just having my computer at access, I can just like go in and put my grades in and it's fine. I've just found a different system. But the iPad is really great for performing, and it's really great for access in the classroom, just being able to jot ideas down or be able to work on things while the students are working, especially if you want to just be out and about in the classroom, walking around. So, I want to use it more. I am curious about the larger iPad because that's really cool. I think for gigging musicians, you're absolutely right. Like that'll be a huge deal.
People don't need an iPad Pro for that.
No.
Like it's just too much. Right. And it's so much hardware. This is why because like other than battery life, this is one of the reasons why I don't really feel like I need to upgrade is all my prior iPads have kind of felt old by the time a new one comes out. But like this is, the iPad is so overpowered for what it is. Like I'm on team. I'll give a shout out, but the shout out is me. I was on another podcast recently called the iPad Pros podcast with Tim Chatton. And I'll link the episode to that in the show notes to this episode. But we talked all about like how I use the iPad for like gigging and for score reading in the band room. And he asked the question like, what would make you buy a new iPad? And I was like, if they put Mac OS on it, which they're not gonna do.
Yeah, you're right.
So like, but I will say speaking of grading, one other workflow is the learning management we use in Howard County is Canvas. And I've been giving more playing tests lately for my band students. And one little workflow that I like is like when I wake up on Saturday morning with my son and we're like watching some like Paw Patrol or whatever, and I have a little AirPod in. I can like there's like the rubric shows up on the sidebar while the little video of the kid performance is there, so I can kind of like really comfortably with just an iPad Mini on my lap, like give pretty meaningful musical feedback and then hit the next button and then just like have this like cycle of like kid videos that I sort of work through.
Oh, that's great.
In this sort of relaxed and more passive way where my mind is able to be really engaged with the feedback that I'm giving, but my body is maybe like not in like office desk mode. It's just sort of like
Right.
sitting back. So that's a pretty cool workflow. But yeah, not something that's going to make me buy a new iPad.
Right. I think a lot of people can relate to that, because grading at a certain point, it is always associated with, I got to sit at my desk and I have to be focused in everything that I'm doing in this one space, in this quiet space. But sometimes sitting on the couch and just kind of doing it there's something about that. I find that I can also focus just as well. But it has to be the right type of situation. Like I have to.
It's contextual for sure.
Yeah, I have to be alert.
You have to be in the right headspace for it.
Yes.
But like grading performance tests, because that you have to actually like watch them all in their entirety, like that. You just have to. And if you're ever going to keep up with them,
right?
And there's a reason lots of band teachers don't give them. But like if you're ever going to keep up with them, you have to kind of just always be grading performance tests if that's
right.
how you want to assess your students. So that's the thing.
Yeah, I love that.
That's the thing that works. All right. Well, speaking of Apple, there have been so this is just another topic for another episode, but they're getting like regulated finally by the EU. I can certainly show. I can include some links to some places where people can read. People who are actually really steeped in this knowledge talk about it if they really want more. But the EU is regulating Apple. Apple it's actually gotten to the point where since the last original new content episode of the show, Apple has. Now there are third-party app stores in the EU. The first one that I'm aware of is called the Alt Store. If you have a phone that's got an Apple ID and you're registered, and that indicates that you live somewhere that's in the EU, then you can now install a third-party app store. And there's all sorts of kind of interesting implications for this. But one that I thought I would mention here, even though it's not specifically musical or even professional, is that Apple is you can see them responding to this change in a more worldwide way. So if you're in the EU, first of all, and you're listening to this, you should absolutely check out the idea of an alternative app store, because I think that there are going to be apps that people can make for your phone, for your iPhone, that Apple will otherwise not let a developer make and put in the App Store. So, for example, I know there's one that's like a clipboard manager. I use a clipboard manager on my Mac all the time. I would be completely lost without one. This is the idea that I can hit a keyboard shortcut and see a history of all the things I've copied to my clipboard, like images, text, and then recall them and enter them into a field. So this is not something an iPhone can do, but there's already an Alt Store app on the Alt Store that lets you, it just lets you, it just keeps a history of everything you've copied to your clipboard on the phone. So there's a lot of stuff that's going to be cool and worth looking out for. Maybe we'll even see some musical stuff. I know that there's third-party web browsers on iOS cannot use any engine other than Apple's WebKit engine. So even though you can put Chrome on your iPad, Google has made the user interface, but the actual thing that's rendering the websites is all Apple's technology. But this EU regulation states that third-party web browsers can use their own engine. So one limitation I know of iPads is that WebKit, Apple's thing, doesn't allow you to plug a MIDI, run with MIDI.
Oh, yeah. A
MIDI connection to the web. So if you're using Soundtrap in the Safari browser on an iPad, and your kids all have iPads, you might not be able to get a MIDI controller to trigger notes on an iPad. So that could be something that might change if say Google was to put a version of Chrome on the EU App Store that had their, I forget what the name of their, it's Sunday morning. Chromium is what, I forget what their web engine is, but basically there's a lot of interesting stuff that's worth looking out for. And even if you don't live in the EU, it's clear that Apple is either, whether they're responding to future parts of the world regulating them or just responding to the competition, consider that competition is a good thing. They've already have made some changes to all app stores worldwide. So, for example, you could not publish an app until recently where you could how Netflix can just say use our app and you get all of the shows.
Yes.
Well, Microsoft until recently could not say subscribe to our gaming service and you get all of the games. Apple would make them submit each game as a separate app to the App Store.
Oh, okay.
But now they're letting developers do that. I don't know who is actually gonna do that, but that's one thing. And then speaking of games, they're also now allowing emulators on the worldwide app store, which means that you can, if you like playing old school games, you can now download. And there's all sorts of like legal gray area here that I'm not prepared to get into at this time. But like emulators are absolutely a thing. There's lots of, I think, like, reasons to and to not, like, like Nintendo is probably going to come at you if you like put an app on the App Store that like simulates Nintendo Switch games. But, there are some apps that emulate like some of these old school games that don't, either maybe you like have a cartridge and you have a save file from your childhood or something that you want to play.
That's cool.
Or some other thing. Yeah, it's cool. And so it's a really good one I wanted to highlight. It's called Delta, and it is like it allows you to use emulation software for a bunch of old school Nintendo systems like Game Boy and Game Boy DS, I think, and a couple of others, Super Nintendo.
Yep.
So it's kind of cool. That was a thing that you until like a couple of weeks ago could not do on an iPhone, and now because of regulation, you can now do. So
love it.
Kind of interesting what's changing, I think, and I would not be surprised if Google gets similarly challenged in the near future, and if Apple and all these bigger tech companies start to have to rethink some perhaps not of their best practices for the world by being regulated. And because it really could. I mean, it has the potential. It's very early days, but it has the potential to really change like what kind of software we can use on mobile devices.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, hey, if I can play my Animal Crossing on the go now, I would be a happy camper.
It's all that some people want.
Really, truly.
Just to play their Animal Crossing on the go. Right?
I gotta say, I used to play Animal Crossing way, way back in the day, and I had an experience when I was in 4th grade, and I remember sitting playing it for about 4 hours, and my mom came in, and she reamed me out. Mom, if you're listening to this, I'm sorry I'm bringing this up again, but it scarred me. Like, she made me feel so bad that I wasn't outside playing with my sister, and so I didn't touch it for probably... I don't know. How old am I now? I'm not going to reveal that, but it's been like 15 years since I've played it. And my fiance started playing it again. And I realized how much I missed Animal Crossing in my life. So sometimes I will spare myself a half hour when I get home from school, and I will just zone out and I will play my beautiful Animal Crossing. And it's an experience. You know what I mean? It really brings you back.
Yeah.
It's like one of those moments in your day where you just don't have to think about anything else than just listening to lovely blip bleep music and, plant your flowers and get your mail and, collect your cash or your bells, for Animal Crossing people. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's a good
right.
Good thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's already like cozy gaming,
Yes.
But then like if you play like one of the older ones that's from your childhood, then you're just engaging with your, you're just connecting to your inner child, and so you're just getting all of the good
It's
feelings.
like having Apple Jacks again, or like having honeycomb cereal. It just cereal, yeah, one of those things.
So good. So just to be clear, Delta is available to anyone it's free on the App Store, so people should check that out if they have any interest in that. And then there's like, I don't even know where to begin with this news. So I guess I would just open it up to you to tell me if you have any favorites, because there are some new AI music tools that have come out even just since I last recorded. I know the one that everyone's talking about is Udio, which I have not used yet, so I'm not going to talk about it. But this is just the kind of category of thing where it's like got a chat bot that you say to it, like, give me a country song with a female vocalist singing about heartbreak or something. You know what I mean? It's just one of these things, and then it generates something pretty impressive for a computer. That's
okay. Wow. I mean, that's really impressive.
There's a lot of these things. Udio is apparently like, the one people are talking about just because of how good it is at doing that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that is the scariest thing, how good it is. I mean, we all know now for sure. I use Kits AI, and it's a really interesting app where you can clone a voice using an AI voice generator. And you can also generate custom AI voice models by training your own personal voice recordings. And the site also provides a library of officially licensed AI voice models that you can use in your own compositions. So that's been really cool. I've had an experience where I had a student who wanted a different type of voice for his song. And it was his voice that he had recorded into the mic, but he really wanted like a deep, darker sounding tone. So I put it in Kits AI, and we got the generated voice back, and now he loves his song. Now, obviously, it's not ideal because, I mean, I want students to find their own voice and use their own voice with that, but I may have students who want to grow up to be a producer behind the scenes and do other people's music. So, at a certain point, it's like, well, if he wants that sound, I just might as well just give it to him. It was cool and it was easy. So that was great. Songwriter's Pad is really great. I don't know if I've brought this up already, but it's an AI generator. You write your own lyrics down and then you can use their AI space. So it can generate ideas. It's got a song block editor. It's got a rhyming dictionary. It's got an audio recorder, and it's got a bunch of other tools for song management. So you can keep all of your lyrics in one place. That's really cool. And Splice, for people who don't use Splice, you should start using it. They have a new feature where it will take different sample sounds and it will generate ones that sound good together. It's a good idea starter. And I think these are all good idea starters. Kits AI, Songwriter's Pad, using Splice with some of their blocks that they have for AI choice loops. I think those are all really cool AI music tools.
All right, I'm bouncing over to some segments. I like to do a music pick of the week, and I've got one for you.
Okay, I'm ready for it.
You and then you have one for me.
I
can
do,
see here
yeah.
in the note. So for those who have not heard of Tank and the Bangas, this is one of those things where like the YouTube algorithm gave me they'll always give me the next Tiny Desk concert.
Oh,
whenever one comes out.
Don't even get me started on Tiny Desk. I'm sorry, but shout out to Justin Timberlake.
A lot of good ones, yeah. Oh, did he?
Tiny Desk concert.
Oh, I did know he did one.
It's so good. And, I'm one of those people that will, just binge watch Tiny Desk. And it just all the feels. But, when you see it live happening in that little tiny space, magic happens. Anyway, shout out JT. So good.
So several years ago, they came up in my Tiny Desk algorithm, whatever, YouTube recommendations, and I was blown away. It's not every day you hear something. When you listen to a lot of music, it's okay, how often is something going to be wow, that's really different? And this was one of those moments. I was like, oh my gosh, what she is doing vocally and how many different genres she's crossing in her own vocal sound, sometimes even within the same phrase of music, is really cool. And it just so happens that our district, our school district, has what's called the Howard County Youth Orchestra. So it's a high school. It's like a youth orchestra of students. They audition for it and then they play. And some of our county music directors direct this ensemble. And they've been over the past couple of years doing a once-a-year collaboration with a popular artist at the local. There's a pretty big performance venue in the area. Called the Merriweather Post Pavilion. And so this year they collaborated with Tank and the Bangas, and they got to play, these kids got to play on stage with her, orchestral arrangements with her throughout her whole set. It was a collaboration. Last year they worked with Guster.
Okay.
And so the arrangements of the orchestral arrangements for the Tank and the Bangas songs are I don't know if they were originally written for the New Deco Orchestra, but New Deco is a group that collaborates with a lot of popular music artists. And so I'll put a link. There's to a song that's a good song by her, a video on YouTube with the New Deco group, just to get an idea of what she sounds like with orchestra. Because it's a really, really great performance, and I'm so thrilled that my students, some of them, got to have that experience.
I love that. That's amazing. I've been listening to a lot of different types of music. There's a period of time where I listened to a lot of lo-fi music, and then I was listening strictly to jazz. And then I switched to hip-hop. I mean, sometimes I can't decide what I want to listen to, so I listen to everything. But there's one particular song that I've been playing on repeat, and it was actually my number one for Spotify of the year, the top song for me. And it's called It Runs Through Me. It's by Tom Misch and De La Soul. And for those of you who don't know Tom Misch, which you probably do, because he's really popular, but it's a sweet blend of jazz, hip hop, and disco music, which is just all the music that I need on a Friday morning to get me going, And this particular song, what I love about it is it has all of those components, but it's all about music. And there's not a lot of songs that would just speak directly to what it is. And, as a music teacher, when I can get up in the morning and like sing this anthem before I start school, I mean, that's all I need. So it runs through me. If you haven't heard it, check it out, because it's just such a bop, and it's not what you'd expect. Just incredible guitar player. Yeah, it's a good one.
Awesome. All right, I'm going to move on to the tech tip of the week, and I'm going to do one that this is not really like a professional one, but I think there's almost like anyone who's holding an iPhone in their or in their hand or has one in their pocket is going to relate to this. So I'm like, it's hard to be a teacher and to like not be in the building. Like it's always easier to not write sub-plans. And so when you've got to deal with some medical stuff, you just don't want to be like feeling like, in addition to like it being harder to do your already hard job, you don't want to feel like you have to be your own like secretary for like managing all of your other appointments in your life. And so I'm going to just tell everyone out there, because people apparently do not know that this exists, but there is an app on the iPhone called Health. It's actually, I think it's on the iPad too. And you can like, apps that will track health data can feed all like into the categories of this app. It can track lots of things like heart rate, exercise minutes, water intake, caffeine, any kind of like vitamin or mineral or like category of caloric health. It just tracks sleep data. Like it just has all these data points. And then other apps can like feed it if you give it permission. So like I use a water tracking app called Waterminder. Well, that water that I track goes into the water category of the Apple Health app. It's sort of like a house that aggregates all of your anything on your watch or the phone. The phone tracks a lot of things by itself, like walking distance and things. But there's actually a tab in the app called Health Records, where you can, if you have a participating medical place of that you go, you can log in through the Apple Health app, and it'll just put records in a transparent, easy to read charts and graphs inside of that same app. So like I'm at the I left work early. This is maybe like TMI for the listeners, but I like had to leave work early for like a thing that was going on pretty recently. And I was like going to the doctor, and he was like, he was like, you should come in for that. And I'm like, okay, cool. I'm fine, by the way, in case anyone's concerned. But like I go in, I had to like get someone to cover my class for 10 minutes while I went in. And because how often is your doctor like, oh, we'll see you right now? Like that's special treatment. So I'm like, I better go. And he's like, tell me about your blood work on this thing for like recently. And I was like, usually I would be like fiddling with my phone for like 7 hours, just trying to find an email with a PDF or something, or like logging into some web portal for whoever took that blood work. But because the place where I do my blood work goes into Apple Health, I was just able to tap the Health app icon and then go to Health Records, and then boom, there it was in a readable chart that even I can read. I was like, this part of my blood is too high. And he was like, cool, that was fast.
Wow.
And so Health Records inside of the Apple Health app, it'll make you more aware of your health, which is an important thing. You got to be healthy if you're going to survive out there as a teacher. You got to take care of yourself.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And just to have that on your fingertips, it just, wow. I didn't even know that existed. That's so cool. I love that. Yeah, it's so important. It is like the last thing you want to think about when you're already concerning yourself with everything school, everything personal life, and you just want to be tip-top shape. But sometimes, your health gets in the way, and just to streamline it, have all your documentation there. Yeah, that's the way to go. I love that. Just a side note, I've been in the process of wedding planning. I'm getting married.
Congratulations. Oh my gosh. And I have not on the air I'm sorry. Am I like undermining your awesome thing you just said by congratulating you for another awesome thing?
I didn't mean to pause, but it's still a kind of a realization.
You just have a lot of like very exciting stuff going on this year. So
no, it's all good. Yeah, wow. I still can't pinch me. Yeah, and it's.
Well, hold on. I was going to say the other thing though.
You
can I
say
the other thing? I have not on the air.
Yeah.
Congratulated. Okay. Well, you were the Time Teacher of the Year, and that's
awesome. Yes, that happened.
Yeah.
I mean, it's still this year, so yeah, it's happening.
Yeah, I mean, so it's right. So like, yeah, do you feel like that's a year-long event? Like when you're the 2024 Time Teacher of the Year, you're like, yeah, I'm that when I'm like accepting the award, but I'm also that right now because it is 2024.
It's interesting because I didn't see it like that until I started speaking with people, and they're like, well, it's the whole year, like we get to celebrate the whole year. I'm like, no, it's like people who say like, oh, it's my birthday month. You know what I mean? Like, no, you just get one day.
Right.
That's it. It's your birthday, and then it's the rest of May. Or it's the rest of August. But no, it's, it kind of feels like my birthday month, but it's a birthday year.
Right. Anytime you want cake, you can just tell yourself, I am celebrating being the time teacher of the year in 2024, and it is still the calendar year 2024.
It's my number one excuse if I want ice cream. Yeah, it's just like, we're celebrating. We're still celebrating even after February. Yeah, it's great. It's been amazing. And just all the love, all the appreciation, and most of all the support has been just super. It's great. And even without the award, I have always felt like I've made the right choice in being a music tech teacher, even though it's been tough. I love what I do. And this is kind of just like the cherry on top, to have that realization and people really appreciate this kind of work and support it. So yeah, it's been awesome. And yeah, so speaking of planning a wedding, I'm actually planning 2 weddings,
Yes.
which is, I don't know why I did that to myself. Horrible. Don't do it. Just have one big bash. It's way better. And you can pool all your money into that. But we wanted to accommodate for 90-year-old grandparents. So we're doing 2. And it got insane trying to teach and also plan for a wedding. So for people who are doing that, I totally understand you. It is a lot of work. And so my fiance introduced me to a program called Notion. And Notion is awesome because you can categorize everything that you need to on that site. You can add all your links and they're all saved in the same place. You can create a playlist and you can do like Excel spreadsheets all in there. So financials, music related things, contracts, any links that we have for Etsy or additional decor, things like that. I mean, there's so much that goes into planning now for a wedding, just because social media, the expectation is you look like a Pinterest wedding, and it's probably not going to happen, but the pressure's there. So to keep all things in one place, Notion is great. Shout out to that. Also, we're talking about tech tips. So I will mention quickly Telefunken, which is a fantastic company whose mission is to develop restorative parts for some of the world's most prized vintage vacuum tube microphones. They also have a passion for supporting audio engineering education, which is really important, and it ties in with music technology. Their website, they released a series of multi-track sessions you can download for free and mix and master any way that you like. So it's awesome for students to play around with, and they can get a feel for some of the effects like reverb, delay, EQ, and all they're doing is just adding those to their song. And just get used to listening to different genres and different instruments and timbres that are comprised within that. So I wanted to do a quick shout out to Telefunken and their amazing work putting together those multi-tracks for free for people. It's a great resource if you haven't checked it out. The link will be with this podcast too. That website, it's like telefunkenelectroacoustic.com/multitracks. So check it out.
Nice. Awesome tip. And app. Notion is crazy good. There's a whole, for anyone who has not heard it, I'll link in the show notes. Dr. Corey Meals came on a little over a year ago, I think, and we did a whole episode on personal knowledge management software, of which that's sort of like the category that Notion, I think, is most associated with. Sort of like these broad, like collaborative note-taking database sort of apps where like notes link to other notes and lots of different kinds of mixed media can go in them. And there's like a lot of really good ones. We're right now collaborating in Craft, which, by the way, since Craft is something that I have talked about on this show, and I know that some people have really been turned on to it. I will say that Craft now finally allows you to have, so you used to be able to like have a shared notebook. They don't call it that though. What do they call it? A workspace with another user in order to collaborate in the same notes. But for this episode, I think this was maybe even my first time I've used it, like where I wasn't just kind of playing with it, but like I made my note, like this is a Craft note I have in my own database of music ed tech talk stuff. And I shared a link to you. And then I'm guessing you didn't even have to log in. Like you're able to just like type stuff straight into it without being in my shared workspace. And so Craft is another one of these kinds of tools. And I could talk your ear off about Craft If you some other time, maybe if you want. But like, yeah, it's a really great organizational tool that I've built curriculum in. I've collaborated with my music team in. I take notes for this show, and I just do so many things with it. It's great. And Notion is amongst the most popular of these tools.
Yeah, this has been great using this tool that you shared with me. The doc has everything we need for this podcast. So awesome work. Yeah.
All right there. Cool. All right. Well, I'll give. So you gave. I know you have another app pick of the week other than just Notion, but I'll do one real quick. I mentioned Delta, the game emulator earlier, but I wanted to also give a shout out to an app I've been using since probably like 2011 called Solver. And the reason I'm shouting them out is their Solver 3 just came out for iPhone, which is kind of actually wild to think about. This app I've been using this long is just now available on my phone. It is kind of like a scratch pad calculator, but it's designed so that you can just sort of like type into it like you would a regular note, but then it does smart stuff with the numerical input. So like I'm not someone who can like very easily think like a programmer when I'm trying to work through a problem. I need to be thinking like much more freely. So like if I'm limited to the cells in an Excel spreadsheet, when I'm just trying to figure out like if I have enough money to pay for the buses to our field trip, like that's not going to work for me. So like it's the kind of thing where you open up the app and it's just a scratch pad and you can just type in plain English like number of buses needed for Hershey Park field trip is 3 or 6 or 7, and then on the enter, and then the next line, number of students attending is 741. And then what happens is like it's in the totals of the numbers you're typing in as you're just like writing in natural English. And then it does stuff with variables too. So you can like say like, okay, like on the next line, you're like, okay, now tell me like the number of students who will need to sit on each bus based on how many buses we have and how many students are going. And then how much money is it going to cost per kid, per bus, and all that stuff. And you're just sort of typing into it like it's a note. But then along the right sidebar, it's actually like adding up stuff for you, which is really, really great for people like me who just do not think in a spreadsheety kind of way, unless I have.
Right. That's amazing. I love that. That would be super helpful for wedding planning too. Just thought of that.
Yeah, it's great. It's just a nice little scratch pad. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, no, that's
I really
fantastic for field trips. Oh, because we painstakingly have to do it in a spreadsheet and know what to actually use for the equations and things like that. And for someone who is not trained in Excel, it's a lot easier to use that app.
Just times where Excel is, or like really good in Excel, just it's such a utility that they're going to be faster at every little thing in Excel. This is how I feel about Logic Pro, actually. Like if I need to do the tiniest little thing to an audio file, even though I might have an app that is good for just doing that one thing that runs a little lighter and faster, I might still just go to my comfort tool and load up the big heavy thing because I just know exactly where the clicks are. And then you're using YouTube Music instead of Spotify, or you're using both? What's up with that?
Well, I mean, we could go into a deep conversation about this, but I got to say, I've been using Spotify since college. So it's been a while. I won't reveal how much time, but let's say I've been using it for 10 years, for example, right? And I had a lot of playlists that I accrued over the years, classroom, and then for my own personal use. And then, as we all know, that news came out about how Spotify is cutting royalties to artists who make less than the top tier. So like roughly 2/3 of the tracks on the platform. And immediately I was like, I got to do something about this. So I decided to cancel my subscription. And this is just within the past couple months or so, because it's painstaking having to transfer your music over to a new app. But I will say I'm using YouTube Music now, and it has just pretty much all the same things that I would use in Spotify. I mean, obviously playlists and the way that they curate those is a little bit different, but it's been my go-to. I still have everything that I need there, and, that peace of mind that I'm doing the right thing and that these artists are getting their royalties and things like that. So yeah, that's been my app pick. YouTube Music, switching over.
It's great. It doesn't get a lot of love, but it's, and I think like for, I don't know, Spotify has such, so many people have so much momentum with their built up playlists and things that like it's hard to move. But like for me, I'm seeing less and less reasons to use Spotify, aside from even just like the ethical ones you mentioned. And to be real, like none of these companies are paying artists anywhere near enough what they should be. But like, I use Apple Music for like just for reasons because it like ties into the whole Apple ecosystem and all that stuff. But I do have a YouTube Premium account, and so that gets me YouTube Music, and I poke around in there. I'm like, there's times where I will even, and this just speaks to how bad Apple Music is on the Mac in particular. Like there are times where I need to play my class a recording of something, and it is actually faster to find it in YouTube than it is for Apple Music to load something that's in my own hard drive of my computer. But that's another story. And so having that sort of, because I'm already looking up music so often on YouTube, to also have like the musical aspect
exactly.
of that.
Yep, same here.
How does it handle sharing tracks? Like if you share a link to a song that's in YouTube Music, but somebody doesn't subscribe, what is that? Do you know what that does?
I don't know if I've
listen to
actually
a sample?
tested that out yet.
Because I don't know if YouTube Music has a free tier like Spotify does.
Oh,
I'm gonna look.
Yeah, I think you do need to have a premium account. Yeah, but then you get YouTube Premium, so no ads. I mean, that is like absolutely worth it. 100%. Don't want those ads when using YouTube, especially if you're binge watching Tiny Desk. You can't have the ads. No.
Exactly. Yeah, having YouTube Premium changed my relationship to YouTube.
Yes.
Like it was a thing that I had to when I, you know what I mean? Like I would never go to YouTube on purpose. Or out of interest, but now that has been resolved, I'm just there all the time, watching way more videos.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know how long I've been a subscriber, but like, and I hear the ads are like awful. And like a 30-second video will give you like a really long ad.
Sometimes that's the worst part. Is just like, why would they show me this ad? I mean, it's even happening like in Facebook now, and it just have no relationship to you at all and what you would be purchasing. I mean, yeah, poor fiance was getting like TikTok reels of girls dancing, and he's like, I don't want to use Facebook anymore because I'm getting these like really inappropriate ads. And it's just like, I don't know, we're exposed to so much already. Do we need to see that,
Well, and since we were slightly optimistic about AI earlier in the conversation, I think I will balance that with my cynicism now and say like the social media, I mean, it is the example of where AI is absolutely like a blight on society, like terrible for us all. Because like my Facebook thing is now not just like algorithmic stuff that I don't want to see. I'm like really not doing much with it these days, but I do check it, every now and then. And it's like, it used to just be things I didn't want, and then it became ads I didn't want. And now it's like 2/3 to 3/4 is like AI generated stuff that there's like, it's just like spam.
Yes.
Pretty much. Like it'll be like a headline about a celebrity that's fake, and then the article is actually clickable and will be a made up AI generated article, and then the image will be some clickbaity thing that is like not real or something that's like not even related to the article. I don't know. And it's just so much of that, and I don't know if I'm more disappointed that that's what this potentially, because Facebook used to be a potentially useful way for connecting to people, but like, I don't know if I'm more upset that it's not that anymore, or if I'm more upset that actually those posts do so well that it reflects on what people actually want. I don't know what's more of a bummer, but nonetheless,
I know what you mean. That's where we're at. So yeah, it's just now it's a process of figuring out if it's worth it to open up the app. No, I'd much rather listen to music, put on a song or two, or I would play Animal Crossing. I don't know.
Yeah.
Or play music. Yeah. Or, there are more options now too. With the summertime coming, get outside, go for a walk, enjoy some vitamin D,
Yeah, go touch grass.
Yeah, go touch grass. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
That's right.
Not enough people talk about it. It's true.
Yeah, really underrated, the touching of grass.
Oh man.
I think that's the outline. Do you have anything like that before we like, end the aired part of this conversation? Do you have anything you want to promote or throw out there?
Oh, I mean, I'm trying to think of anything in particular.
Like, speaking of the terrible social media landscape, that's probably a place people can find you.
Oh, absolutely. Find me in the
work,
terrible social media landscape. Please, I encourage you. You can find me at... Actually, I don't even know my Instagram handle. That's hilarious. That's how much I don't use
No,
Instagram
I think
anymore.
you actually have a pretty clever one, though, isn't it?
MIDI for middles. Yeah, I try to post there as much as I can, which that means now at least once a month. No, I'm just kidding. It's more frequent than that. But yeah, I would say MIDI for Middles, Instagram, Facebook, look me up. Let's be friends. I'm not on Twitter, so it's all good. But LinkedIn, I'm also on there too. So, I mean, just, let's be friends. You can also email me if you have questions about Soundtrap. I use it all the time, even for my own personal music making. So you can email me at gdesmarais@gmail.com. I can give that to Robbie, and he can add that as well. Ableton too, if you have any questions about that, or if you just want to talk shop about music technology. I love that. It's one of my favorite things to do. As you could tell, this conversation could definitely go on longer if we let it. So...
Yeah, and I think what did we say?
Yeah,
we'll do an hour, and then here we are, an hour 45. And
estimated 45 minutes.
And I'm using pretty much all of it, so.
I love it.
I'm Robbie Burns. Thanks for listening to Music Ed Tech Talk. You can find the show's page, show notes for this episode, and my blog at musicedtechtalk.com. You can subscribe to blog posts through an RSS app of your choice, and you can subscribe to the podcast in a podcast app of your choice. You can now get blog posts delivered right into your email inbox once a week. Please rate and review this show in the podcast app. It absolutely helps. Word of mouth is helpful too, so please spread the word about it. You can learn more about my music and teaching career at robbieburns.com. I'm all over the internet at Robbie Burns or _Robbie Burns on most social media sites. Consider supporting me on Patreon at patreon.com/musicedtechtalk. All tiers get perks, but even the base tier gets you access to the Music Ed Tech Talk Discord community, where you can chat with other supporters and guests of the show about music, apps, pedagogy, lesson ideas, tech support, and more. It's a fun place to be, and I hope to connect with you there. Thanks to this episode's sponsor, Scale Exercise Play Along Tracks. Be sure to check it out. See you next time.